Hello, my name is Logan and I'm your host, the Mighty Pirate. In today's video, I'm going over the rise of the Cameron family. My sources for today's video are the Star League Sourcebook and Sarna.net. On March 2316, Director General Mckenna left Terra with a large fleet of warships bound for the wealthy independent worlds of Quentin, Era, and Helen. These worlds had just signed a defense pact among themselves. Though the planetary leaders realized they had little chance of preventing the conquest of their worlds, they hoped to teach the Director General a lesson. To meet the enemy fleet's navy, these three planets converted the small fleet of cargo ships and interplanetary messenger ships into warships by adding lasers and missile tubes. They also beefed up their ground defenses by better equipping several divisions of trained militia and backing them up with a large force of volunteers. Despite the dogged and sometimes fanatical determination of the resistance fighters, the hegemony's military might prevailed. The fight to conquer these worlds was a bitter one. The result of these conflicts created a dynamic approach that would be further used to subjugate rebellious worlds. The campaign for a planet began months before the actual fighting, with the gathering of all information available on the target world. Once a tentative plan had been sketched out, the necessary troops would be mustered and loaded aboard their vessels for the jump into the combat zone. 2 large warships, usually cruiser class or larger, and several smaller jump ships carrying aerospace fighters would make the first jump, materializing at the system's 2 jump points with their guns and missiles at the ready. These ships would make sure that the jump points would be free of enemy vessels before giving the all-clear to the vulnerable jump ships carrying the troops. The Director General himself, in his battlecruiser the Black Lion, would often lead these efforts to secure these enemy jump points. During General Mckenna's campaigns of persuasion, he brought 40 formerly independent worlds into compliance under the hegemony banner by 2317, with a second campaign launched in 2320 that was met with limited success, caused by the poor performance of aerospace fighters in an atmospheric environment, which would leave dropships without air support, and, as in wars before, the vast morale difference between those fighting to protect their homes and those that would oppress them caused the second campaign to grind to a slow halt, as resistance forces would use any number of guerrilla tactics to defy their oppressors. Meanwhile, worlds outside the hegemony had found it necessary or profitable to band together. This saw the rise of the Merrick Commonwealth, as well as the foundations for what would be all of the great houses of the inner sphere. By 2330, these associations had become large, vigorously independent domains, each with its own private military. After encountering a few of these militaries, Mckenna knew that he could not conquer any of them. Privately, he doubted he could conquer even one of them without crippling the hegemony's economy. Diplomacy suddenly became Mckenna's most potent weapon. He began to tone down the rhetoric of his speeches. No longer did he speak of one realm uniting all of humanity, but instead described the hegemony as the repository of all mankind's knowledge and compassion. Within the hegemony government, Mckenna also began to completely revamp the government's foreign affairs department. In this era, many diplomatic delegations traveled from the hegemony to the worlds beyond its borders to exchange ambassadors and establish full diplomatic relations. Despite improved relations between the hegemony and the various pacts and confederations around it, there were still quite a few unaffiliated worlds that the Director General Mckenna considered fair game. In 2335, he launched his third and last major offensive to seize certain worlds that he considered vital to the hegemony's continued growth. Most of these planets laid towards the Federation of Psyche in what would one day be called the Lyrian Commonwealth. Though both of these planets were technically within the boundaries claimed by the Federation of Psyche, they were populated by an anti-technology religious sect that had no wish to join any interplanetary realm. The Federation had tolerated the inhabitants' wishes, but these resource and water-rich planets were too much of a temptation for Director General Mckenna. Though technically in command, the Director General had turned over most of his authority to his son, Admiral Conrad Mckenna, who had his father's charisma and intelligence. Since 2333, Conrad Mckenna had commanded the hegemony navy, over 300 warships with skill and panache. Everyone expected Conrad to perform like Mckenna. Most expected that he would succeed his father as Director General. When James Mckenna announced that duties and poor health were forcing him to leave the strike force and return to Terra, Admiral Conrad Mckenna took over. Conrad drafted new plans that would speed up the assault, assuming that the low-tech world would put up little resistance, but due to the various neighboring worlds seeing this as an injustice, they provided the natives of this low-tech world with ballistic weaponry that they used to great effect against the hegemony deployed ground forces. This cost the hegemony years of conflict to subjugate just one world. The various commanders began to doubt the value of Conrad as leader, to which any that spoke publicly about this, Conrad had them imprisoned and stripped of rank. In the end, Conrad was able to claim this world for the hegemony, and made plans to claim another nearby world, and immediately began to marshal his forces to make up for lost time. What Conrad didn't know was that this low-tech world agreed to many things in exchange for protection from the hegemony invaders. The Federation of Psych didn't want to ruin their good relations with the hegemony, so they placed massive mine fields and sleeper missile fields around the jump points of this primitive world. Due to the hasty deployment of ships in system, when the mines activated, the first wave of ships were wiped out or severely damaged before they had time to report back. When the next wave of ships arrived in system, they activated even more missiles and mines as they went to go save the survivors of the first wave. Taking severe losses and trying to manage the situation, Conrad orders all ships to jump. Still more mines go off, costing 29 troop ships. Conrad, aboard the Black Lion, his father's warship, somehow undamaged, declares an all-out assault on the planet. The defenders have little chance, and are destroyed. Court-martials were ordered by Conrad, but as the proceedings went on, Conrad was hated by the Navy and Army alike. Over 34 ships lost, and an equal or more than that in trained crews. Untold loss in ground forces that never made it to the ground. Public military tensions flared, as charges of incompetence pressed against Conrad Mckenna were pardoned by his father. All across the star realms, the galaxy called for the Director General's impeachment. Though this was technically impossible, the hegemony was on a brink of civil war, and, as it was nearing a boiling point, Director James Mckenna gave an impassioned speech about his sense of duty and service to humanity, as well as his desire to protect his son from the life he thrust upon him, and that it was time for him to retire. Just 10 days later, he died of cancer at the age of 64. In the wake of James Mckenna's death, the High Council was faced with the task of finding his replacement. One of the few things the High Council could agree on is now, without his father to protect him, Conrad would be removed from the line of succession. Conrad spent the rest of his days in isolation at his London home, with his 50 cats and jungle of a garden. There was still political discord and a sense of impending civil war, so the council agreed something had to be done. With no immediate heirs left, the council agreed that the new candidate would have to have at least some of the characteristics that James Mckenna had, if not his name. An exhaustive search was done, including distant relatives of the late Director General. Most candidates were too young, uninterested, or too eager to claim the title. Eventually, the councilors settled on two choices. Graham Nealis, a nephew of James Mckenna. He was a representative of the Pacific Northwest in the Terran Congress. He served in the Marines as an officer, where he won the Medal of Valor. At 45, he was handsome, politically conservative, and a great public speaker. The other candidate was Micheal Cameron, a third cousin to Mckenna. Though only 30 years old, he was a scholarly man and showed a marked distaste for politics and religion of any sort. He, at the time, was serving as an officer in the Army Reserves, but the reason the council considered him was due to his interest and passion for research. He could discuss almost any topic with knowledge greater than or equal to some of the experts in nearly every given field. This led him to being labeled the first Renaissance man in centuries. The other main quality that Micheal Cameron had was the passion he brought to everything he did. It was not uncommon for stories related to Micheal from coworkers and subordinates alike, telling that Micheal would spend day and night working to solve problems within research projects or logistical and supply issues within the Army units he served with. The council could not make a majority vote, so they passed the responsibility to the public. According to the political rules laid down by General James Mckenna, the two candidates had to run strictly controlled political campaigns. The number and type of appearances were strictly limited. Advertisements in the public were banned from use. In this vacuum of media spin and misdirection, the inner sphere at large witnessed frequent debates between Micheal Cameron and Graham Nealis. Though it seemed that Graham had the public favor, it went in favor of Micheal Cameron. It was an incredible upset that caused 3 recounts. On January 17th, 2340, Micheal Cameron was sworn in as the second Director General and Lord Protector of the Terran hegemony. One of the first actions Director Cameron implemented was to create the Hegemony Research Alliance Department so that all government research projects that were non-military could be centralized. With this vast improvement in efficiency and savings in administrative bloat, the Hegemony was able to double its number of active research projects, and as the director allocated additional funds to these projects, the public at large protested. However, within a few years, these research projects yielded cures to most known diseases at the time, as well as the portable fusion generator, so small it could fit in a suitcase. One of the more subtle changes he made was the increase in funding to agencies that investigated the bureaucracy within the hegemony, with a heavy emphasis on filtering and weeding out ineffective parts of bureaucracy. After this culling, the government became unbelievably efficient and able to carry out directives in moments when it might have taken weeks to get approvals before. After looking internally, those same agencies began to look at the practices of businesses. The Director General's order was to ensure upstanding morality within business. This resulted in the policing and regulation of businesses and the economic growth of planets. This also led to alternative economic systems closer to socialism within the hegemony's poorer planets. The biggest and most noteworthy change Lord Micheal Cameron implemented was when he announced in his speech before the Terran Congress, New Year's Day 2351. This is where he implemented the resurrection of the medieval nobility system. Many criticized this action. To this, he retorted, "The reason I have created this peers list is not to reward the people I feel who are somehow superior to the rest, nor will I grant titles to people who follow some sort of approved religion, or who are a proper race or lifestyle, or who blindly support my rule. To do so would surely spell ruin for the hegemony. No, the reason I have reintroduced the concept of nobility is to reward the people who have done more than what was expected of them, and thus have advanced all of mankind's fortunes. It is a reward for action, not for attributes." That will conclude this video. In my next video, I'll be covering the invention of battle mechs as well as the events leading up to and the formation of the Star League.